Hi everyone, it's Lindy on from Pink Whisper Designs. Today I thought it would be fun just to step outside of the typical reds and greens that we use for Christmas, which I do love as well. But I thought it would be fun to change it up a little bit and create this Christmas wreath using some earth tones and some pretty metallics. And we're going to be creating 3 cards today, so I'll show you and talk a little bit about mass producing your cards. So let's go ahead and get started. For my copper colored metallic cardstock, I'm using the Tim Holtz Kraft-stock in the Metallic Classics. We'll grab that one there, but you could certainly grab the gold as well. We'll go ahead and die cut this, and I'll be using these square double stitch dies from Art Impressions, and you can see that I've already taped the 2 largest ones together. We're going to create a pretty stitch frame. So I just grabbed some post-it tape and I tape these together, making sure to line them up nicely so that I have an equal distance of space around all 4 sides. And then I'm going to run this through the die cutting machine on a little bit of an angle, just going to make it much easier to run these through. Since you have the 2 dies together, there's a lot less resistance if you place it on a little bit of an angle. So I die cut 3 of those because again, we're going to be creating 3 cards today. So when you're mass producing cards, it's much easier to do all your steps at one time. Now I'm going to separate those 2 dies, and I'll grab that larger one of those 2 dies, and we'll go ahead and grab our Strathmore Bristol Smooth 100-pound cardstock and run those through. Again, I did 3 of those. So that frame will sit right over top. For the wreath, we're going to be using this pretty twig wreath, and this is from the Art Impressions Frameworks set number 1. And you can see all of these really interesting little frames that you get. I'm going to grab that wreath and we'll stamp that right in the center of one of these white panels. I'm going to prep that quickly with some Pink and Main anti-static powder because we are going to be embossing. Now I am using a permanent ink. This is the vintage Sepia Versafine ink, but I'm going to stamp it a couple of times and make sure that ink is nice and wet so that I can do a little bit of embossing. So you will want to add your embossing powder right away while this is wet because it does dry very quickly. So I had my embossing powder ready. I'm going to sprinkle that clear embossing powder over the top. And I'll do all of these at the same time. So I'm going to set those aside and then I'll emboss them all at once. Now you can do that. So you can leave that embossing powder on there pretty much as long as you want to and then come back and do your embossing. Now if you're worried that that might get smudged or the embossing powder might get knocked off, then go ahead and heat set these one at a time. But I find it easier just to line them up and do my embossing all at one time. So let's go ahead and stamp all 3 of these wreaths. Again, the double stamping will get us some nice wet ink on the paper so that we have time to add that embossing powder. So you just want to sprinkle it on, tap away any excess, and now I have 3 of these ready to go. You could certainly do as many of these as you like, and I do like to work in stages when I'm creating multiple cards. So I've made sure my heat tool was nice and hot, and then I'll go ahead and heat set all 3 of these panels. And that will give a pretty glaze over top of this wreath, which you'll see when we add some ink to this wreath, it's going to make the wreath stand out just a little bit more. So I'll quickly heat set all 3 of these. And once these are nice and cool, let's add some ink over top. I've got the Distress Oxide in the brush Corduroy, and this is kind of an underused color. I love this color. It's really soft. It's kind of an interesting beigey brown color. And what I'm going to do is take a small blending brush and I'll tap away any excess. I just want to kind of give the illusion that I colored this in. Now you could certainly just color this in if you prefer. Just use your markers to do some coloring. But I thought it would be really pretty to kind of give it a little bit of a haze all around the edges. So that's all I'm going to do for the coloring of that. And then I'm going to wipe away any excess that's sitting on top of that embossing powder, just to bring that shine back a little bit. So let's go ahead and do the other two. Now I'll take some of that ink and place it right on my glass media mat. I'll spritz it with a little bit of water from my distress sprayer, and with a small number 0 paintbrush, I'll spatter each of these panels. That'll give me some nice tiny little spatters, and then that'll just tie everything together. I'm going to cut this Kraft heavy cardstock down to 4 1/4 inches by 4 1/4 inches. So we'll have 3 square panels for the front of our card. I do want to ink those up, and I'm going to switch over to the gathered twigs. This is a little bit darker. It's going to frame those edges a little bit better for us, and I don't want to come in very far because we'll have about a 1/4 inch border between our white cardstock and this cardstock. So I don't want to come in too far. I do want to leave a little bit of that Kraft-stock showing. So I went all the way around all 4 sides, and I did that for all 3 of these panels. For the card base, I'm going to cut my Strathmore Bristol Smooth cardstock at 4 1/2 inches by 9 inches, and then I'll score it at 4 1/2 inches. That will give us a square card that measures 4 1/2 by 4 1/2. So let's go ahead and press out the crease on each of these. And I did do that third one off camera, and so I have 3 card bases. So we'll use these as a top folding card. Now going back to that same Versafine ink in the Vintage Sepia, let's stamp our sentiment. I'll be using the Christmas Sentiment set from Art Impressions, and I love this one that says Christmas Magic. I love everything about it. I love the font. I just love how pretty it is. I've used this before, and I'm going to separate the sentiment. I did cut that stamp. I cut out the word Christmas and separated those two. You could certainly keep them together and just mask off sections of that sentiment if you prefer, but I can easily put that back together at any point if I want to. And so I stamped that, and I'm stamping it a little bit up towards the right hand side just because our floral arrangement is going to be along that left hand side of this wreath. So I did all 3 of those. I'm taking that foam mat out of my Mini Misty stamp positioner because the stamps we're using next are the rubber stamps, so they're a little bit thicker, and these will be from the Christmas wreath set. I'm going to grab the sprigs, the pine cones, and we're going to stamp quite a few of these. So because I'm creating 3 cards, of course I'm going to stamp extras of everything. And then for the poinsettias, I'll use the watercolor poinsettia set, all 3 of those, the small, medium, and large. And you can see that on the packaging for these stamp sets, you get some beautiful ideas for coloring them in and creating your scene. So again, back to that Vintage Sepia, let's go ahead and stamp these. I'm just going to use that Stampendable stamp press to press those out quickly. And then I'll just flip this cardstock around and stamp those again. And like I said, I did stamp quite a few of these. I'll show you here in a second exactly what you need for each of the arrangements. Off camera, I stamped some more, and then I'm going to start with the beige and mid-brown. These are the Zig Clean Color Real Brush pens, and this is to color in my little pine cones. So I added the beige all over, and I'm doing a little bit of shadowing with that mid-brown. I'll use that Zig blender pen to blend these out, and you can leave it a little bit lighter in the center if you like, just for a little bit of contrast. And you can also remove a little bit of that ink down the center with your blender pen if you like. Now with the beige, I'm going to color in the petals on my poinsettia. So I know this is a little bit different, but I really wanted to show you how pretty and elegant of a Christmas card you can make using your earth tones. And I thought with this beige, I'm not going to add a lot. I'm not going to try to color in the entire petal. I'm just going to add a little bit at the base of the petals and a little bit where those petals overlap. And then I'll just blend that out till it goes white. Now to clean off your blender pen, you just scribble it onto some scrap paper. You can see that I'm scribbling it there up top, and that'll remove any excess ink from your blender. So if you have a little bit too much beige, you can always just grab it and scribble it up top there and just remove any of that excess ink. So I colored those in, and then I'm going to add a little bit of brown to the center of each of these, and I'm just kind of dotting it on. Just a little tiny bit of interest and texture in the center of those poinsettia. And then with olive green and mid green, I'll color in these little sprigs. And I'll start with that lighter green, add a little bit of the darker green, kind of towards the base of those leaves, and then I'll just pull it out, keeping the tips of those leaves the lightest. So this is some really easy coloring. Again, when you're mass producing, you probably want to do all your stamping, then sit and do all of your coloring. And I find it really fun just to have everything stamped. I can sit and watch TV while I'm coloring these in. So you can make a little production line, and then I do all my cutting out of those images separately as well. So once everything's colored, then I sit and cut everything out. And I am leaving a little white border all the way around the edges on each of these, just to make that cutting a little bit easier. Now let's start gluing some layers together. I've got that card base, and again, I want this to be top folding. So my crease is at the top, and then I'll add this craft color cardstock. And you can see where some of that shadowing that we added adds a nice bit of dimension. It almost adds another layer. To the eye, it looks almost like another layer of color. So let's center those on each of these card panels. And I am using the Nuvo Deluxe adhesive to do that. Now once that was done, we can add our wreath. So again, I'll just apply that glue around the back side of each of these panels. All of these will be flat until we get to that frame layer, and then I am going to pop that up. That will give us a little bit more dimension. So let's do this last one. And now we'll take that metallic frame that we created earlier, and we're going to pop this up, and I'm going to use some foam strips to do this. So these are 1/8 inch foam strips, and I'll apply those all around all four sides. And then we can go ahead and remove the backing and add these to the card. And remember, this will be the same size as that white panel underneath, so it'll line up pretty easily. So let's go ahead and do these other two. And keep in mind that all of the products I'm using today are listed and linked down below, as well as on my blog. And it does help me if you use those links. I do receive a small commission, but at no additional cost to you. So it really does help to support my channel, and I really appreciate it when you do that. Thank you so much in advance. And also, let's create the pieces, or put together the pieces we need to create our little arrangement. So I'm going to take those sprigs. Some go kind of curved to the left and some to the right. So I've got 3 of each. I've got 3 pine cones, and then I've got the small, medium, and large of each of the poinsettias. For a little dimension, I'm just curling those up a little bit with my fingers. I'll place a little dab of glue down in the center. So I started with the poinsettia first. I'm just going to place those down. Now that glue will stay wet a little bit longer so that we have time to move this arrangement around a little bit if we need to. For this smaller one, I'm going to pop it up with one of those little foam strips. And now we can start adding the sprigs. I'll add some to the top and then some off to the right hand side. And I'm going to just kind of follow along the shape of the wreath. And I'm not going to add glue to the entire sprig, just sort of down towards the bottom, because I want the sprig to still have a little bit of dimension. And you can curl those up with your fingers as well. Just again to make those pop up a little bit. So I've got 3 at the top that kind of curve off to the right there, and then I'll do 3 at the bottom. Let's pop in one of those little pine cones. And now we could do the right hand side. I'll tuck 3 of those in here. And look at how this is coming together. It's so easy. Once everything's colored and cut out, then this is the fun part, just kind of laying out your arrangement. You could do a pretty border with these cut out as well with your poinsettia and your little sprigs. You could just do a border down the side of a card, which would be really beautiful. I've got 2 more pine cones, and we'll tuck those in between. So once that's all set, again, let's do another one. So I'll show you one more on camera, and then the third one I'll do off camera. So again, you can see that I'm just curling up those petals a little bit, adding a little bit of the foam to pop up that smaller one. I did all these the same way, but you could change these up and do them all a little bit different. You could have maybe the smaller poinsettia or the medium-sized poinsettia in the upper right-hand side with a sprig or 2, and then do a little arrangement on the lower left-hand side. So mix it up if you want to. I was just trying to keep the process moving, so I found it easier just to create them all exactly the same. And then what we'll be doing is we'll add some pretty metallic pearls to this. And that is just going to bring a little bit of sparkle, but I didn't want them to be too sparkly, so they're kind of pearlized, which is really going to add a lot. So again, I did that third one off camera, and here are those little gems that I was talking about. These are from Pinkfresh Studio, and these are in a champagne pearl color. So again, you're going to get that pretty shimmer, but very soft look against all the browns and tans and beiges that we have on the card. So I popped a few of those in place, and I'll give you a closer look at those in a second. So we've got all 3 ready to go. So let's take a closer look. Now I did stamp the inside sentiment with that same sentiment set, and I saved one of those pine cones for the inside. Right above each sentiment, I placed one on the inside. So here's a closer look at the card with that pretty spattering and that beautiful copper metallic frame and some of those pretty pearlized gems. So I really hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you're inspired to give this a try. And I really do appreciate if you hit that like button and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a single video. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you all have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.